The cold winds whip across the surface of the North Atlantic as the HMS Hood, the mighty Hood, slices through the waves. The flagship of the Royal Navy.
She was called the Mighty Hood, the pride of the Royal Navy. Sleek, powerful, and seemingly invincible, HMS Hood symbolized British strength during World War II. But in a single devastating moment in 1941, she vanished beneath the icy waters of the North Atlantic, taking over 1,400 souls with her.
The Hood joined the pursuit. In the strait between Greenland and Iceland, she came within range of the German ship's guns. More than 1,400 men died, just 3 survived.
For decades, her fate remained a haunting mystery. What exactly happened to the ship that was never supposed to sink? Then, 60 years later, a deep-sea expedition finally discovered the wreck, and what they found resting on the ocean floor stunned everyone who saw it. Join us in this video as we reveal the details. The search for the pride of the Royal Navy. In 2001, 60 years after the tragic sinking of HMS Hood, a team led by shipwreck hunter David Mearns set out on an extraordinary mission to find the pride of the Royal Navy. Commissioned by Channel 4, Mearns and his company, Blue Water Recoveries, were tasked with locating the legendary battlecruiser and capturing underwater footage of both Hood and her infamous nemesis, the German battleship Bismarck. This wasn't just another expedition. It was a historic first. No one had ever attempted to find Hood's resting place before. For 6 years, Mearns had been privately researching the fate of Hood, driven by both professional curiosity and a deep sense of duty to those who had perished. He gained the support of the Royal Navy, the HMS Hood Association, veteran groups, and even the ship's last living survivor, Ted Briggs, a man who had watched his shipmates vanish beneath the cold Atlantic waves. But time was short. The team had just 4 months to organize their mission and take advantage of a narrow window of calm weather in the unforgiving North Atlantic. On board, things were intense. The expedition wasn't just a search mission, it was also a live media event. A documentary crew captured every moment. Journalists made satellite broadcasts, and even live footage from the remotely operated underwater vehicle was planned to stream directly to Channel 4's website. A bold idea for 2001. After first capturing footage of the Bismarck, Mearns turned his attention to Hood. The team began scanning a 600-square nautical mile area, a vast and uncertain search box deep beneath the waves. The odds were against them, but in the 39th hour of searching, the sonar revealed something unmistakable. The Hood had been found. Resting nearly 9,200 feet below the surface, Hood lay in pieces across 2 large debris fields. Her bow and stern were separated, the massive amidships section inverted in a crater, silent proof of the devastating explosion that tore her apart in 1941. The stern, which had miraculously survived the blast, rested eastward, while fragments of the bow and smaller remains like propellers and the 4-inch fire control director were scattered nearby. The heavily armored conning tower stood alone, as if guarding what was left of her. Closer analysis revealed chilling details. The starboard side of the ship was peeled open, its plates curling outward, likely the path of the explosion through the fuel tanks. Small debris fields marked where the aft magazines once were, completely obliterated in the blast. Some experts believed a secondary explosion might have occurred in the bow, but others, including Mearns and his colleague White, dismissed this theory, arguing the evidence didn't match the scale or pattern expected from a secondary blast. Bill Jurenz, another researcher, pointed out that there wasn't even a magazine near the point where the hull broke, suggesting that the ship's structure may have simply failed from immense pressure as the stern dragged the bow downward. The wreck's final position told its own story. The forward section lay on its port side, the amidships section upside down, and the stern angled upward, its rudder locked at a 20-degree port turn. That single detail confirmed that Hood's crew had tried to maneuver in her final seconds, attempting to bring her rear guns, X and Y turrets, to bear on the German fleet. In 2002, the British government declared the site an official war grave under the Protection of Military Remains Act. Today, the shattered remains of HMS Hood rest silently on the ocean floor, a solemn reminder of her power, her loss, and the 1,415 souls who went down with her. But how did the HMS Hood come to be in the first place? Let's find out. The rise of the mighty Hood. Long before her tragic end, HMS Hood was the very symbol of British power at sea. Launched in 1918 and commissioned in 1920, she was named in honor of Admiral Samuel Hood, the first Viscount Hood of Whitley, and, by extension, a tribute to the entire Hood family, a proud naval dynasty. When she entered service, Hood was the largest and most advanced warship Britain had ever built, representing the height of naval engineering after World War I. At more than 860 feet long and bristling with 8 15-inch guns, she was unmatched in both speed and firepower. During her career, an estimated 18,000 men would serve aboard her, a floating city of sailors, engineers, and gunners who called her home. To the public, she wasn't just a warship. She was a national icon. Known affectionately as the Mighty Hood, she became the proud face of the Royal Navy and a powerful symbol of the British Empire's reach and prestige. During the 1920s, Hood took on a new role as a global ambassador for British diplomacy. Between 1923 and 1924, she led the famous Empire Cruise, a worldwide goodwill tour designed to show the flag and strengthen Britain's ties across its vast empire. Commanding a squadron of ships, Hood sailed more than 38,000 nautical miles, stopping at ports from Africa to Australia and the Americas. Crowds lined harbors and beaches to catch a glimpse of her. More than 750,000 people saw the Mighty Hood during that single journey. Wherever she went, she inspired awe. Throughout the 1930s, Hood served faithfully with the Home and Atlantic fleets, and later in the Mediterranean, maintaining Britain's influence across the seas. But as newer battleships emerged, her age began to show. By 1939, she was in desperate need of modernization. Her engines were worn, her armor outdated, and her systems obsolete compared to the newer generation of warships. A major refit was scheduled to bring her up to modern standards. Then, history intervened. The outbreak of World War II put all such plans on hold. Instead of the overhaul she needed, Hood was pressed back into service. For the next 2 years, she carried out vital operations in support of Allied forces in Norway and North Africa, still holding her place at the forefront of the Royal Navy's pride. Even as war raged and newer ships took to the seas, the Mighty Hood remained more than just a vessel. She was a legend, a reminder of Britain's naval glory. No one could have imagined that the ship which had once circled the globe in triumph would soon vanish beneath the waves in tragedy. What caused the HMS Hood to sink? Keep watching to find out. The final battle in the Denmark Strait. In May 1941, the German battleship Bismarck, the most feared warship in the world, slipped into the Atlantic, threatening to wreak havoc on Allied supply lines. In response, the Royal Navy moved swiftly. Leading the charge was HMS Hood, the pride of the fleet, flying the flag of Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland. By her side sailed the brand-new battleship Prince of Wales. Their mission was clear: intercept Bismarck before she could reach the open Atlantic and attack Allied convoys. On May 23rd, 2 British cruisers, Norfolk and Suffolk, spotted Bismarck and her escort. The heavy cruiser Prince Eugen near the icy waters of the Denmark Strait, the narrow passage between Greenland and Iceland. Holland immediately set course for interception. At dawn the next day, May 24th, the British squadron sighted the German ships at 5:37. The sea was cold and gray, the light dim, but the enemy was in view. Unbeknownst to the British, the Germans already knew they were being followed. Prince Eugen's hydrophones had picked up the sound of fast-approaching propellers hours earlier. As Hood and Prince of Wales closed the distance, the British opened fire at 5:52. Hood, targeting Prince Eugen, mistakenly believing she was Bismarck, let loose the first thunderous salvos of the battle. 3 minutes later, both German ships returned fire, their heavy shells streaking across the gray dawn sky toward the pride of the Royal Navy. The first German shell to hit Hood came from Prince Eugen. It struck the boat deck between the ship's funnels, igniting a massive fire among the anti-aircraft ammunition stored there. Smoke and flame billowed upward as the crew fought desperately to contain it. Then, just before 6 o'clock, disaster struck. While Hood turned slightly to port to bring her rear guns, the powerful X and Y turrets, into action, Bismarck unleashed her fifth salvo from nearly 10 miles away. One shell found its mark. It is believed to have hit near the mainmast or the aft magazines, and what followed was sheer devastation. A blinding flash erupted from Hood's midsection. A massive column of flame shot skyward, followed by an earth-shattering explosion that ripped the ship apart. The blast tore through her magazines, breaking the mighty vessel in two. Within 3 minutes, HMS Hood, the largest and most celebrated warship in the Royal Navy, was gone. Her bow rose briefly, nearly vertical, before sliding beneath the cold, silent sea. Out of a crew of 1,418 men, only 3 survived. Ordinary signalman Ted Briggs, able seaman Robert Tilburn, and midshipman William Dundas. They clung to debris for nearly 2 hours in the freezing water until they were rescued by the destroyer Electra. Around them floated wreckage, but no bodies. The Atlantic had claimed almost everyone aboard the Hood, leaving behind only smoke, silence, and an unhealed wound in British naval history. So, could there have been an underlying factor that doomed the HMS Hood? Stay tuned to find out. Built to impress, but doomed by design. When HMS Hood entered service, she was the pride of the Royal Navy, the largest, fastest, and most powerful warship in the world. She embodied British naval dominance, a floating symbol of power and prestige. But hidden within her elegant lines and towering silhouette was a fatal flaw, one that had been there since the very beginning. Hood's design was already well underway when the Battle of Jutland shook the Royal Navy in 1916. That battle exposed dangerous weaknesses in British battle cruisers, especially their tendency to sacrifice armor for speed. The revelation forced urgent changes to Hood's construction. Her designers quickly added thousands of tons of extra armor, thickening her belt and reinforcing the decks over critical areas. These modifications made her stronger against direct, horizontal fire. Her main belt was even angled outward to better resist shells coming in at flatter trajectories. But this armor came at a cost. The added weight pushed her bow lower in the water, reducing her freeboard. In rough seas, she took on water forward and risked flooding. And while her defenses were strengthened in some areas, the protection was uneven. Over her magazines, the storage for her massive shells and gunpowder, the deck armor was thicker, but elsewhere it remained relatively thin. This imbalance left a dangerous weakness, a narrow but very real pathway where a plunging shell, fired from long range, could reach the ship's most vulnerable spot. By 1941, naval warfare had evolved. Battles were now fought at far greater distances, often over 16,000 yards, where shells followed steep, high arcs before crashing down. Hood's armor, designed to resist low, flat trajectories, was ill-suited for this kind of combat. In live fire tests, 15-inch shells had already shown the potential to punch through her middle belt and continue straight through the deck slope right into her heart. Engineers knew this was a weakness and made some improvements late in construction, adding 3-inch plates near the magazines and removing some secondary guns to balance the weight. But the heavier armor they had planned, 5 inches forward and 6 inches aft, was never installed. A full modernization had been scheduled for 1941. New turbines and boilers, upgraded secondary guns, and the thicker deck armor she so badly needed. But fate intervened. Before Hood could ever receive her long-overdue upgrades, she was sent to hunt Bismarck. In that final battle, the very weakness her designers had worried about, that slender path through the armor, became the crack through which history itself broke her apart. What happened after the sinking of the HMS Hood? Let's find out. Vengeance for the Hood. When the mighty Hood vanished beneath the waves, Prince of Wales was left alone to face Bismarck and Prince Eugen. Despite being brand new and still working through technical issues, Prince of Wales continued the fight. Her guns jammed, turrets malfunctioned, and the ship suffered several direct hits from Bismarck's powerful 15-inch shells. Still, before being forced to retreat, the Prince of Wales managed to land 3 crucial hits on her enemy, one of which would change the course of the chase. That single shell tore through Bismarck's hull and ruptured her fuel tanks, contaminating much of her precious fuel supply. With her ability to continue raiding in the Atlantic compromised, Bismarck turned south, steering for occupied France to seek repairs and safety. But the damage had already sealed her fate. Though she managed to slip away briefly, the Royal Navy was relentless. 3 days later, on May 27, 1941, Bismarck was cornered and sunk, a symbolic act of vengeance for the loss of HMS Hood and the 1,415 men who went down with her. Back home, Britain reeled from the devastating news. HMS Hood had been the pride of the Royal Navy for 2 decades. Her loss struck at the heart of the nation. The Admiralty issued an official statement that same day describing how Hood had received an unlucky hit in a magazine and blew up. It was a simple, almost understated announcement for such a catastrophic loss. Less than 2 weeks later, on June 2, 1941, the first official inquiry into the disaster was held, led by Vice Admiral Sir Geoffrey Blake. The board concluded that a direct hit from one or more of Bismarck's 15-inch shells had penetrated Hood's armor at about 16,500 yards, detonating her aft magazines and destroying the ship. But not everyone was satisfied. Some naval officers, including Acting Vice Admiral Tom Phillips, criticized the inquiry for being rushed and incomplete. There was no detailed record of witness testimonies. Then came an unexpected challenge to the findings. Sir Stanley Goodall, the Director of Naval Construction, proposed a startling theory that Hood might have been destroyed not by an enemy shell, but by the explosion of her own torpedoes. His claim sparked a second investigation. The Second Board of Inquiry, led by Rear Admiral Harold Walker, convened in September 1941. It was far more thorough than the first, gathering evidence from 176 eyewitnesses and carefully analyzing every possible explanation. After months of review, the board concluded nearly identical to the first. Hood had been struck by a 15-inch shell that triggered an explosion in or near her magazines. The likely sequence was that the smaller 4-inch magazines ignited first, setting off the catastrophic blast that obliterated the aft section of the ship. Both inquiries cleared Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland of any blame. He had done everything he could in an impossible situation. The tragedy was one of design and circumstance, not of command. Today, memorials to Hood's lost crew can be found across the United Kingdom, in Portsmouth, in the Hood Chapel at St. John the Baptist Church in Bouldry, and even on family gravestones, like that of George David Spinner, whose memory lives on beside his brothers in Kent. Each name carved in stone is a quiet reminder of the day Britain's greatest warship and her gallant crew were lost to the deep. Over the years, different theories emerged about the sinking of the HMS Hood. Keep watching to find out what they are. The mystery behind the mighty Hood's final explosion. The exact cause of the loss of HMS Hood has remained one of the most debated topics in naval history. Various theories have been proposed over the decades, each attempting to explain the catastrophic explosion that tore the ship apart and sent her to the depths within minutes. The most widely accepted theory at the time of her sinking was that a direct hit from a German shell penetrated one of Hood's magazines aft. Since the German heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen had ceased firing at Hood by that moment, the fatal shell could only have come from the Bismarck. Early reports and survivor testimonies initially supported this version, assuming that the explosion had originated in the aft magazines. However, doubt began to surface following eyewitness statements suggesting that the blast was seen near the mainmast, much farther forward than the location of those magazines. Captain Leach of the Prince of Wales, for instance, presented a sketch to the second board of inquiry showing the explosion's position. At this second board, expert witnesses introduced a new interpretation. They suggested that what observers saw was actually the venting of a violent, but not instantaneous explosion. Technically, a deflagration within Hood's 4-inch shell magazines. The blast would have vented through the engine room ventilators, giving the illusion of a more central detonation. This explosion might have been powerful enough to rupture the bulkhead separating the 4-inch and 15-inch magazines. Once that bulkhead failed, the fire and gases would have reached the larger magazine, triggering a massive secondary explosion that completely destroyed the ship. This theory, linking a smaller initial fire to a catastrophic chain reaction, was ultimately adopted by the Board of Inquiry. Another theory proposed that a shell had fallen short of Hood, entered the water, and traveled underwater to strike below the armored belt, penetrating directly into a magazine. A similar event was recorded during the same battle when the Prince of Wales was struck by a 15-inch shell that traveled approximately 80 feet underwater before hitting about 28 feet below the waterline. Although that shell failed to explode, it demonstrated the possibility of underwater trajectory hits. However, the board deemed this scenario unlikely for Hood, reasoning that a shell's fuse would have detonated long before it reached the ship. Nonetheless, later calculations by naval historian William Jurens suggested that one of Bismarck's shells, which fell roughly 20 feet short of Hood, could theoretically have penetrated the hull beneath the armor belt and exploded near a magazine if the fuse behaved unpredictably. A third hypothesis, put forward by Goodall, suggested that Hood's own torpedoes might have been detonated, either by the intense fire raging across the boat deck or by a direct hit from Bismarck. Such an explosion would have ripped open the ship's side, compromising the structural strength of the hull. Water rushing in at nearly 30 knots could then have caused the stern to shear off from the rest of the vessel. However, evidence from the wreck later contradicted this theory, as the torpedo compartments did not show signs of initiating the destruction. Another possibility is that the fatal fire on the boat deck managed to spread into a magazine. Witnesses during the second inquiry testified that all ammunition trunk doors for the 4-inch magazines were closed during the engagement, but it remains possible that an enemy shell opened one of these doors or that flames found another route, perhaps through ventilation ducts, vents, or even through the floor of a 15-inch gunhouse, as survivor Ted Briggs once speculated. Naval historian Anthony Preston, writing in 1979, presented a different view. He claimed that Hood's aft magazines were surrounded by additional 4-inch anti-aircraft shells that had been stored outside the protected armored barbettes. This unprotected stowage could have ignited either from the spreading deck fire or from a shell impact, setting off the larger explosion. There was also a less conventional theory suggesting that the disaster began within Hood's own gun system. Eyewitnesses during the second inquiry noted unusual flashes and discharges from Hood's 15-inch guns. It was proposed that one of these shells might have detonated prematurely inside the gun, causing an internal explosion that overwhelmed the gunhouse and spread into the magazine below. Although safety mechanisms had been installed after the disastrous magazine explosions at Jutland to prevent such a chain reaction, it's possible these systems failed under the stress of battle. In his comprehensive 1987 study, Jurens reviewed most of these theories and concluded that the most probable cause of Hood's destruction was indeed the explosion of a 4-inch magazine. However, he acknowledged that several possible triggers could have led to that initial blast. Jurens dismissed the idea of torpedo detonations and the boat deck fire as direct causes, and he also challenged the popular belief that a plunging shell penetrated Hood's deck armor. According to his calculations, at the time of the fatal hit, Bismarck's 15-inch shells would have been descending at an angle of only about 14 degrees, far too shallow to pierce Hood's horizontal armor. His computer models also showed that any shell following that trajectory would first have to pass through the ship's belt armor before reaching a magazine, though he conceded that Hood's final maneuver might have exposed her vulnerable 12-inch belt to such a strike. Further examination revealed that much of the starboard torpedo bulge plating was missing, suggesting that the fatal fire may have spread from the aft section through the starboard fuel tanks, amplifying the devastation. Ultimately, the wreck evidence ruled out Goodall's torpedo explosion theory and conflicted with the idea that Hood was destroyed by her own guns. However, other explanations, including the 4-inch magazine explosion triggered by a shell from Bismarck, remained consistent with both eyewitness accounts and physical findings. In 2019, a detailed study by William Jurens, William Garsky, and Robert Doolin Jr. further refined the conclusion. They determined that Hood's destruction was most likely caused by a 380mm shell from Bismarck that penetrated the deck armor and detonated within the aft 4-inch magazine. This blast ignited the cordite stored inside, which in turn set off the adjacent 15-inch magazine. The immense expansion of combustion gases then caused the ship's structure to fail catastrophically, venting out through the hull sides and engine room vents. The blast ejected the aft turrets and tore the stern away from the rest of the ship. Within 3 minutes, the once proud, mighty Hood, symbol of British naval power, was gone, leaving only 3 survivors to tell the tale. What legacy did the HMS Hood leave behind? Let's find out. The Return of the Bell, honoring the mighty Hood's legacy. In 2012, the British government granted permission for renowned ocean explorer David Mearns to return to the wreck site of HMS Hood. His mission was a solemn one: to recover one of the ship's 2 bells lying in a small debris field near her final resting place. Backed by the HMS Hood Association, Mearns planned to bring the bell home to Portsmouth, where it would serve as the centerpiece of the first official and permanent memorial to the ship's crew at the newly refurbished National Museum of the Royal Navy. The recovery expedition also aimed to resurvey the wreck using advanced imaging technology unavailable during the original 2001 expedition. As before, The team followed a strict look but don't touch policy, ensuring the site, considered a war grave, remained undisturbed. The initial 2012 attempt, sponsored by Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen and conducted from his yacht Octopus, was abandoned after 10 days of poor weather in the treacherous North Atlantic. 3 years later, in 2015, Mearns and his team returned to complete the mission. On 7 August 2015, after years of planning and setbacks, they successfully retrieved Hood's bell from the seabed. Following careful conservation, the bell was unveiled by Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, on the 24th of May 2016, exactly 75 years after the Battle of the Denmark Strait, the day Hood was lost.
A fitting homecoming for the bell of the mighty Hood. Her loss was an epic naval tragedy, and the return home of her bell, some 7 decades on, is an extraordinary story in its own right.
During the unveiling ceremony at Portsmouth, the bell was rung 8 times, a naval tradition known as 8 bells, marking noon, in honor of the 1,415 sailors who perished aboard the ship. The commemorative service was attended by descendants of Hood's crew, ensuring the memory of those men lived on not only in history books, but in the hearts of their families. The bell now stands proudly in the museum's exhibit on the Battle of Jutland, symbolizing both sacrifice and remembrance. This particular bell carries a legacy even older than the battlecruiser itself. It was originally fitted on the pre-dreadnought battleship HMS Hood from 1891 to 1914, before being installed aboard the later Hood. Even after decades under the sea, traces of vivid royal blue paint could still be seen on the crown and interior of the bell, a haunting reminder of its regal past. Several other relics from Hood have survived the years. A large fragment of wood from one of her boats was discovered washed up on the Norwegian coast shortly after her sinking and is now displayed in the National Maritime Museum in London. In April 1942, nearly a year after the tragedy, a metal container filled with administrative papers washed ashore on the Norwegian island of Senja. Though most of its contents were lost, the container's lid survived and was presented to the Royal Navy's shore establishment, HMS Centurion, in 1981. A beautifully detailed builder's model of HMS Hood, dating back to when she was first laid down, is proudly displayed in the Riverside Museum in Glasgow, a fitting tribute in the city where she was built. Other surviving relics were items removed before the ship's final voyage. 2 of Hood's 5.5-inch guns, taken off during a 1935 refit, were sent to Ascension Island, where they were mounted as a coastal defense battery overlooking the port of Georgetown. The guns saw their only action on the 9th of December 1941, when they opened fire on the German submarine U-124, which had surfaced to attack the island. Though no hits were scored, the submarine crash-dived and retreated, and the guns remained as silent sentinels. In 1984, the Royal Air Force restored them as a memorial. Another curious relic comes from a 1935 collision between Hood and the battlecruiser Renown off the coast of Spain. During the incident, one of Hood's propellers struck Renown's bow, breaking off fragments that were later recovered by dockyard workers. The pieces were kept as mementos, stamped with inscriptions like Hood v. Renown, January 23, 1935. Some of these fragments are now privately owned, while others are preserved by the Hood family and the HMS Hood Association. One even resurfaced years later in Glasgow, where the ship had been built, linking her legacy back to her birthplace. Today, each artifact, whether a bell, a gun, or a fragment of metal, carries the weight of history. Together, they tell the story of a ship that once embodied the pride of the Royal Navy, a crew whose courage defined an era, and a name that still echoes across the waves: the mighty Hood. So, What do you think about the discovery of the HMS Hood 60 years later? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you for watching this video. We hope you found it interesting. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video shown on your screen to catch up on your favorite celebrity stories. See you there.